Subscribe to Echo Tales for deeply emotional, romantic, and mature stories that echo through your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support meaningful storytelling. Most people think love has a deadline, that it fades after a certain age, like the last light slipping from a window at dusk. Margot used to think that too. 60 years of living had taught her that some doors close quietly, and once they do, they stay closed. She had known passion once. She had known the kind of love that arrives in your 20s with loud promises and ends in your 40s with quiet disappointments. After her divorce 10 years ago, Margot found comfort in silence, books, tea, and the slow rhythm of routine. She spent her days managing a small public library in a sleepy coastal town where nothing ever truly changed. The sea still sighed against the shore. The same faces wandered the same streets. And Margot, with her silver-streaked hair and earth-toned cardigans, had made peace with the idea that her life's big chapters were behind her. Then Leo walked in. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the air outside feels heavier than it should. The bell above the library door chimed softly, and Margot looked up from her desk. He didn't belong there. That was her first thought. He was young, too young to be searching for something in a room filled with dust and silence. Tall, with messy brown hair and a leather-bound notebook tucked under his arm, he had the easy movements of someone who hadn't yet been worn down by time. But what struck Margot most weren't his looks. It was his eyes, calm, searching, and oddly out of place for a 21-year-old. He walked straight to the poetry section, like he'd been there before. After a few minutes, he approached her desk, holding out a worn copy of Rainer Maria Rilke. "Do you know anything about this one?" he asked. His voice was warm, unhurried, curious. Margot blinked, surprised. Most young men his age were buried in their phones or talking too loudly with friends. But here he was, asking about a German poet from the early 1900s, like it meant something. She cleared her throat, feeling strangely self-conscious. "He writes about solitude," she said carefully, "and longing. It's beautiful, but not always easy." Leo smiled. "That's exactly what I'm looking for." From that moment, something subtle shifted. He returned that Thursday and the Tuesday after. He stayed longer each time, not always talking, but always nearby. Sometimes he asked questions about books. Other times he simply sat across the room, writing in his notebook while Margot reshelved returns. It wasn't flirtation. Not yet. It was something gentler, a connection that neither of them could quite name. Margot felt it like a small tug at the edge of her soul, one she tried to ignore. She told herself that he was just curious, that he reminded her of a younger version of someone she once loved, that she was only flattered because it had been so long since anyone had looked at her and seen her, not the librarian, not the older woman, but the person underneath. But when Leo laughed, she listened too hard. And when he looked at her, her heart paused, just for a second. She thought about telling him not to come so often, to be careful. But she didn't. Because part of her, the part she thought had gone quiet forever, was waking up again. And in that quiet library, with its creaking floors and forgotten books, Margot realized something she hadn't dared believe in years. Maybe some stories don't end when you expect. Maybe some stories are just waiting for the right reader. It started to feel like a secret, one that neither Margot nor Leo spoke out loud, but both quietly protected. Every Tuesday and Thursday, without fail, he would appear. He never sent messages or called ahead. He didn't need to. Something unspoken had already formed between them, like the soft turning of a page before it's read. And just like that, what began as brief conversations about books slowly bloomed into long, meandering talks about life. They would sit in the back room of the library, a space few people even knew existed, It smelled of old paper, jasmine tea, and something warmer, something like comfort. There was only one small window there, where sunlight would slip in shyly, casting golden light over their quiet little corner. That space became theirs. Not by declaration, but by presence. Leo asked questions that caught Margot off guard. Not just about literature or history, but about her. Real questions. What made you leave your marriage? Do you still believe in love? What makes you lonely? No one had asked her those things in years, maybe ever. And Margot answered, not all at once, but slowly, like peeling back old wallpaper to reveal a wall that had been waiting to breathe again. She told him about her daughter, Claire, who now lived far away and rarely called. About the quiet ache of watching love die in a house you still live in. About the joy and fear of starting over, too late in life. Leo never looked away. He didn't interrupt or try to fix anything. He simply listened, his eyes locked on hers, like every word she said mattered. One afternoon, while sipping tea, he reached for a book she was holding. Their fingers touched, just for a second. It was nothing, and everything. The touch was innocent, but the silence that followed was not. Margot pulled her hand back a little too quickly. Her heart was suddenly loud in her chest. She told herself not to be ridiculous. He was 21, a boy, and she was a woman who had lived 3 of his lifetimes. But the truth, the dangerous, whispering truth, was that Margot didn't feel old when she was with him, not foolish, not invisible, not used up. She felt seen, alive, soft again. Still, she was careful, too careful. She didn't let herself dwell on the way he sometimes looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, or how, when he read poetry aloud, it felt like a song meant only for her. But one day, as they were shelving books together, Leo said something that made her freeze. "I don't think you realize how beautiful you are when you talk about the past," he said softly. "It's like watching a candle light up a room that's been dark too long." Margot didn't know what to say. No one had called her beautiful in years, not in a way that felt real. That night, she lay awake in bed, replaying his words. She told herself it was just kindness, that he was young and poetic, and that didn't mean anything. But she couldn't deny it anymore. She was drawn to him, not just his youth, not his face, but the soul behind it, the stillness, the way he made the world feel alive again. And yet, a voice deep inside her warned, "This is dangerous. This is foolish. Don't forget who you are." But it was already too late, because every time he walked through that library door, he wasn't just entering a building. He was walking straight into her heart. Some moments arrive so quietly, you don't realize they've changed everything until after they pass. It was a cold evening in late October when the shift finally came. The sky had turned a moody gray, and the scent of rain hung in the air like a promise. The library was nearly empty, and Margot was finishing up the closing routine, turning off lamps, locking windows, sorting the last pile of returned books, when she heard footsteps behind her. Leo hadn't spoken much that day. He seemed distant, distracted, as if something heavy sat on his chest. Margot had noticed, but she hadn't pushed. She was careful with him, just as she was careful with herself. Their connection had become a fragile kind of rhythm, something quiet, sacred. She didn't dare disturb it. He waited by the door as she reached for her coat. Then, just as she was about to turn off the final light, he held something out to her. A folded piece of paper. No envelope. Just a note. Creased, worn, and clearly read over more than once. "I wasn't going to give this to you," he said, his voice unusually soft. "But I think I need to." Margot hesitated, Her fingers brushed his as she took it, and for a split second, time seemed to pause between them, like the air itself was holding its breath. She didn't read it until later, alone in bed. The rain had started by then, tapping softly against the window, as if urging her to open it. She unfolded the paper with trembling hands. I know what people would say if they knew how I feel. I know what you're probably already telling yourself. That this is a phase, a crush. That I'll wake up one day and see it differently, but I won't. You're the most honest thing in my life, Margot. You've lived, and it shows. In your eyes, in your words, in the way you never pretend. You make me want to be slower, with time. You make me want to understand silence. You make me feel like maybe love isn't about age or approval. Maybe it's about presence. I'm not asking you to feel the same. But I needed you to know. Because every day I leave that library feeling more than I should. And if I don't tell you, I'll carry it like a secret too heavy to bear. Margot didn't realize she was crying until she felt the wetness on her lips. She pressed the letter to her chest and let the silence wash over her. There was no joy in the moment. Not yet. Just sorrow, confusion, longing. She wanted to tear the letter in half and hide it, somewhere he'd never find it, but more than that, she wanted to hold it forever. The next morning, she didn't open the library. She called in sick for the first time in 3 years and stayed wrapped in a shawl on her couch, staring at the teacup she never touched. Her mind went to war with itself. He was 21. What did he know of love? And yet, his words weren't foolish. They weren't immature. They carried weight, depth. They were written by someone who saw her, not as a fleeting curiosity, but as a woman. And that terrified her, because Margot knew how stories like this ended, not in poetry, but in heartbreak, in regret, in whispers from neighbors, and judgment from her own reflection. Still, part of her didn't care, and that part was growing louder. Days passed, then weeks. The library returned to its usual silence, but it felt emptier than before. The space Leo had filled, without noise, without force, now echoed with his absence. Margot tried to move on. She organized the front desk, polished the reading tables, and smiled at familiar faces. But when the doorbell chimed, her heart still paused, hoping. It never was him. She hadn't replied to the letter. She hadn't called. She hadn't done anything except fold his words and place them gently inside a poetry book she kept at her bedside. And every night, she told herself she had made the right choice, that this was kindness, that pushing him away was the only responsible thing to do, but responsible didn't always mean right. And Margot knew that. She felt it in the silence of the evenings, in the quiet ache that pressed against her chest, like a song with no melody. She tried to convince herself it was a passing storm. But what they had shared, those afternoons of soft tea and whispered truths, was not something easily forgotten. Not by her. And she suspected not by him either. Then, one rainy afternoon, while shelving books in the poetry section, the one Leo had always gravitated to, Margot found something tucked between the pages of her favorite Neruda collection. Another note. No envelope. No date. Just folded paper, waiting quietly like it had been holding its breath. If you're afraid, I understand. I'm not asking you to explain. I just want you to know. What I felt was real. Still is. I don't need forever. Or even a label. I don't care about what people think. I just want to sit beside you again. I want to hear your voice, drink your tea, and feel the way I only feel around you. If that's too much, I'll let go. But if there's even a small part of you that wants me there, I'll wait. Margot's knees nearly gave out as she sat down on the nearest bench. The library around her blurred. It wasn't just the words, it was the humility in them, the lack of demand, the presence of love. No pressure, no drama, just hope. That evening, Margot reopened the back room. She dusted off the little teapot they used to share. She lit a candle and left 2 cups on the table. And for the first time in weeks, she left the front door unlocked a few minutes past closing. She didn't know if he would come, but she knew this. Life had taken so much from her already. Time had stolen youth. Distance had stolen her daughter, and fear had nearly stolen this unexpected love. And she was done letting fear write her story. At exactly 6:12, the door creaked open. Leo stood there, soaked from the rain, a hesitant smile on his lips. But his eyes, those steady, soul-deep eyes, hadn't changed. Neither had hers. He didn't say a word. He just stepped inside, his presence filling the room like sunlight after a long winter. She poured the tea. And in the quiet, they both understood something simple and extraordinary. Some love stories aren't built on grand gestures or promises of forever. Some are made of moments, small, sacred, and real. Moments we choose to keep. And Margot, for the first time in decades, chose herself.